Starting from the late 2030s, we'll begin to see more HDB flats reach the 70-year mark of their 99-year leases. MND and HDB will adopt a multi-pronged approach to keep our older flats and estates livable and vibrant. First, we will upgrade the aging flats to ensure their safety and livability. These older flats would have already benefited from one round of upgrades under the previous main upgrading program or the current Home Improvement Program, or HIP, for flats that have passed the 30-year mark. We plan to introduce a second round of upgrades via HIP 2 for flats which pass the 60-year mark. HIP 2 will ensure that our older flats are able to last the flat owners till the end of their 99-year lease. Besides the flats, HDB will also upgrade our older estates and neighbourhoods through programs such as the Neighbourhood Renewal Program and the Silver Upgrading Program. We will ensure that residents who are staying in older estates can continue to enjoy a vibrant neighbourhood with refreshed facilities and greenery. Complementing these efforts is the Voluntary Early Redevelopment Scheme, or VERS. The primary purpose of VERS is to facilitate the orderly redevelopment of aging estates by spacing out the redevelopment and construction works in towns where there are many older blocks that were built around the same time. And as I explained in an earlier media interview, VERS is a complex policy and a long-term undertaking for our society. It will impact existing flat owners and future generations of Singaporeans. So the policy must be designed carefully to be fair and sustainable for both groups. We aim to firm up as many of the policy details as possible during this term of government. After we have established the VERS framework and parameters, we can then start with a few selected sites, likely in the first half of the next decade. We will continually review our processes as we go along and progressively scale up the VERS program by the late 2030s, when more HDB flats reach their 70-year mark. Sir, while the details of the scheme are still being firmed up, I would like to highlight three key considerations which I hope we can have broad agreement on from both sides of the House. First, in managing aging flats and estates, our first priority is to ensure that Singaporeans have a home for life. Today, about 2.5% of HDB households do not own flats that cover the owners to at least age 95, 2.5%. The current median lifespan of Singaporeans is 84. Hence, almost all our HDB households own flats with leases that can cover the owners for life. We will continue to closely monitor the proportion of HDB households who do not own flats with sufficient duration of leases that can cover the owners to the end of life and keep this number as small as possible. Second, as I mentioned earlier, the primary purpose of VERS is to facilitate the orderly redevelopment of towns where many older flats were built within short periods of time. This will allow redevelopment works to be carried out in phases within such towns, which will be less disruptive to residents and heartland businesses. Based on this approach, it is not necessary for every older flat to go through VERS, as we are mindful of the disruption to our residents who will need to relocate when their flats undergo VERS. In addition, VERS, as the V suggests, is voluntary. So there could be instances where residents who are offered VERS collectively decide not to proceed. For residents who do not go through VERS, they can continue to stay in their flats until the leases run out. The government will support them in other ways to keep their flats and estates livable and vibrant, including through upgrading programs like HIP2, Silver Upgrading Program, and Neighbourhood Renewal Program, which I spoke about earlier. This area of work is an important part of our review, as we want to look after residents who go through VERS and also those who do not go through VERS. Third, HDB flats are sold with 99-year leases. A leasehold system ensures fairness to future generations. After 99 years, the land is returned to the state and we can recycle it to build new homes for future generations. This approach allows our current generation to enjoy a diverse range of affordable and accessible housing, while also taking care of the needs of future generations. It improves intergenerational mobility and prevents our society from being split into property owners and those who are not. Mr. Low asks how the VERS package would differ from the Selective En-bloc Redevelopment Scheme, or SERS package. We had explained previously that VERS and SERS have different objectives. SERS is for selected precincts with high redevelopment potential, unlocked through compulsory acquisition. In contrast, VERS is to spread out, to space out the redevelopment of older towns over time, and it will be voluntary in nature. Flats offered VERS will have shorter remaining leases compared to the flats which were previously offered SERS, so the overall compensation for VERS would be lower compared to SERS. Based on the questions from Mr. Fu and Mr. Loh, I note there is broad agreement from both sides of the House that VERS should not create a lottery effect or end up becoming a wealth-generating program. I agree with these views from both members. MND is working out the details of the compensation package. Just as how the valuation of flats varies today, the compensation amount would similarly vary across different VERS sites and flats. We are also studying details such as the voting process and how to support the various demographic groups across different VERS sites with relocation options. MND and HDB will engage Singaporeans on the framework and policy parameters when we are ready with the draft proposals, to take in further views and feedback before we finalize the policy and implementation details.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Minister for his response. I appreciate it's early days for the VERS policy, and I appreciate that we are also in broad agreement about its objectives. I think I just want to raise some SQs to clarify, and hope the Minister can clarify that these topics are under consideration as we build out this policy. So firstly, it's about, as a preamble, I think we can agree that most of the residents who may be subject to VERS will probably be seniors and the elderly. So a lot of them will have paid off their mortgages. They would have been expecting to live in these flats until, they pass on. So how can we assure the public that we will consider these considerations when we try to ensure that these seniors are not left with, let's say, outstanding mortgages that the compensation amount cannot cover, or they are forced to deplete their retirement savings in order to top up cash outlay in order to secure replacement accommodation. And secondly, I understand the voting process is also being worked out. Perhaps Minister can also clarify, are we thinking about doing the voting at the estate level or at the block level? How will we deal with situations where, let's say, 3 blocks in a 5-block cluster have agreed to it, but 2 blocks are holdouts? And also, I understand voting is part and parcel of existing programs like upgrading. However, the consequences of being in the minority that disagrees and is brought along when the majority agrees to the VERS program is much heavier for those who are unwilling to participate. So how will we make sure that the needs of the minority who disagree are met? Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to first thank Mr. Andre Loh for reaffirming that the Workers' Party and the government are in broad agreement on the objectives of VERS, as I shared in my main reply earlier. I thank him for that. Mr. Loh has also raised some very valid questions in terms of how we are going to carry out the VERS policy. And these are indeed some of the key considerations that my colleagues and I are currently discussing. I agree with Mr. Loh that the large majority of the flat owners for the flats that are going through VERS would be likely to be seniors. If we can maintain the gatekeeping for people to buy homes that can last them for life. So by the time the flats reach the time that they need to go through VERS, which will be at least about 70 years or more, we would expect that most of the residents staying in these older flats would be seniors, and hopefully they would have already paid off their mortgages. So I think that's why we feel that it is important to have that upfront gatekeeping to ensure that when people buy homes, we keep the number of people who cannot stay in these homes till the end of their lives to be as small as possible. So homes can be for life. I also agree with Mr. Loh that the voting process needs to be looked at carefully, because this is the stakes are higher, as Mr. Loh pointed out, compared to, say, going through HIP. So certainly, I think we would have to pay careful attention to how we manage the voting process to ensure fairness to different stakeholders. Whether we do it at the estate level or at the block level, I think these are important issues that we need to look at. I don't want to jump too far ahead, so I do seek Mr. Loh's understanding that these are details which I think we would have to share when we have carefully considered the different options. But if you think back on the objectives of VERS, which is to facilitate the orderly redevelopment of older towns where there are many flats that were built around the same period, I think you do need to implement some of these redevelopment, not block by block, but at least a cluster of a few blocks, so that it will be a more orderly process for the redevelopment works. Thank you.
Speaker, my view is that indeed we should not create a lottery effect with the implementation of VERS, and I'm also glad that the Honourable Member, Mr. Andre Loh, has also agreed that it should not be a wealth-generating tool. In fact, Mr. Loh has also raised important points that the Minister has agreed should be considered. I have two further clarifications, I think, to just elucidate the complexity of the issue. First, the Minister has shared that the intent of VERS is to ensure an orderly redevelopment. But at the same time, because it's going to be voluntary, it is going to be subject to voting, my question is, what levers do we have to ensure that there will be a certain amount of success in the voting process? Because if not, then how does the orderly redevelopment take place? So that's my first clarification. My second clarification is to ensure that VERS does not become a lottery, indeed as what Minister says, to ensure that we have homes for life. It means that the alternatives to ensure that all our Singaporeans have homes that are good and fit for accommodation for the entire duration of their tenures will need to be important. So NRP, HIP2, these are important programs. However, the more attractive these programs are, HIP2 and NRP, the less likely you may have residents who vote for VERS. Therein the inherent complexities of this. So it is not an enviable task that the Ministry and the Minister has to deal with. I fully appreciate the challenges. My question is, will we look at VERS together with HIP2 and NRP, weigh the considerations in the implementation? Thank you.
Minister Chee.
Mr. Speaker, I thank Mr. Foo for his two supplementary questions. indeed, I think this consideration between how we can help residents who go through VERS and how we can also look after residents who do not go through VERS is an important one. I would say that while we are firming up the policy parameters and the details of VERS, it shouldn't stop us from being clear that because there will be residents who do not go through VERS, either because they are not offered VERS or because they voted not to proceed with VERS collectively, that we will have to make sure that their flats and their estates can remain livable, can remain safe, and can remain vibrant. So this is something which we will have to pay careful attention to. We will share more details of HIP2 when we are ready. But the concept of HIP2 is at the, say, 60-year and above mark to be able to invest in upgrading the interiors of the older flats to keep them safe and livable, and to also pay attention to looking after the needs of the residents as they age, together with the flats. So the upgrades will also have to pay attention to making the flats senior-friendly and safe. So that is something which I think we are quite clear. We are quite clear that regardless of what the package for VERS is, this objective of upgrading our older flats to keep them livable, safe, upgrade our estates to keep our estates vibrant and livable, that is something that we will do. Now, on top of that, of course, there will be a need to think through the parameters of VERS, because Mr. Fu is correct that if we don't have anyone voting for VERS, supporting VERS, going through with the VERS, then we can't achieve the objective of orderly redevelopment. So that's something we will have to think through and to strike a careful balance so that we are fair to both the existing flat owners, but also to future generations, and to keep this sustainable.